Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. So I wanted to talk about one of those subjects that's just kind of been rattling around in my mind this week, which was just more of what we can potentially expect to see from the FFT remaster. So obviously, when it comes to the remaster and such like that, we have basically no information at this point, but there are a lot of things that we could potentially infer from the previous entry in this kind of, I guess you could say, chain of games. So, for a little context, since this always seems to be missed by a few, FFT and Tactics Ogre, they are very, very, very kind of intertwined as far as everything about them goes. It's not a matter of like, oh, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. No, no, no. Like these two games have essentially always been released as pairs. They've always kind of piggybacked ideas off of each other, and they've always, well, just had a bit of a relationship because, I mean, of course they should. Functionally speaking, Final Fantasy Tactics is the Chaos route from Tactics Ogre that's been fleshed out and dramatized. So, anyways, in fact, actually, you see a lot of the same character archetypes throughout both of them that end up playing out very differently just as they're riffing between different ideas. Like, Agrius was originally supposed to be in Tactics Ogre, that the idea for Ravnus was one of the ones that they had to leave on the cutting room floor, so she ended up coming back as Agrius in FFT, and then as a little bit of a nod to the original idea, they brought her back as Ravnus in Tactics Ogre PSP, and then finally gave her voice acting in the Reborn version here. And so, either way, there's a lot of relationships between these games. Like, for example, Thunder God Sid survived his game, whereas, Hamilton kind of wishes he didn't. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and explain a few things. So, when Tactics Ogre Reborn came around, it did a very interesting thing, because it didn't try to simply loyally adhere to the original as much as it tried to show off what made the original cool to begin with, without necessarily being stuck in the past. And I would expect that we'll see a good bit of that coming out of FFTR whenever it happens, down the road as well. So, what do I mean by this? So, when it comes to Tour here, what we saw was a lot of players getting very upset, a lot of old timers specifically, getting very upset at a lot of the changes that happened to this game. The reason for this is because a lot of the changes were stuff that they were very kind of unused to, and a lot of the stuff that was, for example, extremely cheesy in the original was potentially either removed or reworked. But here's the thing: it was removed with a mind to keep the game flow first and foremost ahead of everything. Okay, so for example, back in the PSP version here, you might have spent a lot of battles going and grinding up skill points to go spend on passives, which you then used to permanently just gain a passive on that character. You shoved them in one of their 10 skill slots, and that was that. That was it was done. The task was complete, and now you have that thing on hand for whenever you want to keep it in your slots. Now, you might notice that there's essentially that build-up, and then that one-time payoff, but then you still have potentially dozens of hours of game left, and that interaction is now just dead, right? There's nothing more to it, it's just there now. And so, for example, that's why we had stuff like the skill cards coming out of this one. Now, that was specifically a Tactics Ogre context kind of thing as to why these cards were both important, like that constant buildup was important and whatever else. I don't expect that FFT would do the cards again, but I would expect that we'll probably see something along the lines of more like feats for characters or something like that. And I talked about that in my previous video here. But I would expect that we'll see a lot less grinding come out of that version. Now, why does that all matter? And what's the deal with the cards in this context? Well, effectively, what's happening with these cards is we're having that same feeling. You're going and you're maneuvering over to go pick up a particular buff to get a particular passive for that particular moment in time, but it's not necessarily going to be the end-all be-all for the rest of the game. You're constantly recycling that same kind of build-up and payoff, and it makes that particular fight flow that much faster, and it also allows the AI to do the same thing as well. So it again was just reusing that payoff in a really, really satisfying way, and also created more kind of dynamism to the game in general. Where, for example, In the case of my main guy right here, he's very vastly incentivized to go and pick up a lot of these auto cards whenever they happen to spawn, so that he can make use of a lot of his otherwise fairly overpowered abilities. So we had a lot of abilities that were more or less considered fairly nuts, but they take some build up to get activated during fights. So, like for example, something like Steel Stance is like a 30 something percent chance to trigger at the start of the turn. Something like Speed Star is about the same. Something like Conserve MP is about the same. Something like Conserve RT, I want to say is like 15%. And for the sake of context, for those that only played FFT, recovery time is basically just your countdown to your next turn. It's wait time with a different name. It's just in this particular context, there's more simulation elements. So, for example, every piece of equipment has a particular set of recovery time that it takes to swing that particular thing. It has a certain weight that it has to even be equipped in the first place. So, like more equipment is a slower unit, that kind of thing. But either way, everything was retooled in fairly overall subtle ways. So okay, let's get into that a little bit. So when it comes to the cards here, again, it was just taking that same build up and payoff and making it happen over and over and over. So that feels pretty good in and of itself. But the thing is, one of those big focuses that this game kind of quietly had and didn't really advertise that much is a gigantic focus on game flow over grind, and in general, it had this feeling of taking the end game feeling from Tactics Ogre PSP specifically, and bringing it to the forefront as just how you play now. Now, what does that mean necessarily? So, in the case of Tactics Ogre PSP, it didn't necessarily have to be a grindy game. Like a lot of these elements were technically there, but to the average player, what they were looking at was typically just the numbers. That they go into the game and they're seeing, okay, if I do this, 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 I make number go up, and that is how I win game. And they would keep that mentality where they were just simply looking for the next upgrade, to get the next kind of permanent upgrade, to go and make that particular unit just traditionally stronger, and that was it. That it's just the only thing that they wanted to focus on, just number go up, we do the same thing, we go in, we get new unit, we grind, we grind, we grind, we grind, we get skill ranks up, we get more points for more skills, we put those in there, we make number go up, and in general, it gave it this reputation of being a grindy game. And FFT, especially if you watch any challenge runs or something, is oftentimes very similar with this mentality of, you want to go set up your classes, so you go grind up those classes, you grind and grind and grind, and you get that payoff of that new class. But again, your interaction is done at that point. It has now concluded. You now have the new class, and that's kind of just where that lies. So this is why I was theorizing in the first video here that I think one thing that we'll probably end up seeing is potentially a situation where we'll maybe see more of a situation where maybe we'll see like feats or an emblem system or something like that, that could potentially allow for repeatedly kind of unlocking these classes in a different way. Where these kind of like little mini achievements could potentially be a way to constantly sort of keep that dopamine flowing, so to speak. So that might be happening. That might not be happening. I don't know. Again, we're just kind of spitballing here, but I have a feeling that we'll see a similar idea of going and reusing that build up to some degree. Maybe you don't just unlock classes, maybe you have to keep them unlocked. Maybe somebody has to keep training in order to still be proficient at those classes. This allows those classes in general to maybe have more specific skills to them. I would kind of like to see something like that. Actually, that's one of those things that I always wanted to see more of after almost seeing the mechanic come to life in a little game from ages ago called Silent Storm, in which you had these units that would, for example, gain proficiency with their weapons, but if you ended up switching to a different weapon, they just suddenly their rifle became alien to them, which was a cool concept, except for the fact that their like XP rates were wildly off to the point where I did like a starter pistol run with that game once, and like even by the end game, they're like, "Yeah, you're kind of proficient with this thing, I guess." Anyway, so okay, let's go back to comparing this with Tor real quick, and as far as what that can tell us, as far as what we might see. Because I can tell you right now, whatever it is will probably be fairly unpredictable. Now, why is that? let's take a look at the revive mechanic, which we should see. Yeah, there we go. Look at how many things change with just the revive mechanic in general, and please bear in mind the context here that this is a case where even old-timers were insisting, oh no, it's just a simple port, completely missing that nearly the entire thing is different on a mechanical level. Alright? Like, it's practically unrecognizable on mechanics level from the original. And again, we had the same kind of duality of complaints of like, no, it's just a simple port for $50. These scamming assholes. At the same time, like, no, too much has changed. Absolutely nothing is similar to what it was before, which is technically true, but also a lot of those mechanics are kind of brought back in different ways. But like, let's explore one very Tactics Ogre PSP problem. You've lost multiple units. Your choice is to either let them bleed out or sacrifice other units to be able to bring them back. Now, you're not actually sacrificing them. That's actually, funnily enough, what you do in the One Vision mod, but more than likely you would bring them back on their feet, and their next turn is God knows when down the timeline. There's a lot of units and a lot of people taking a lot of actions, which means that when they're revived at 10%, they're more than likely just going to get knocked right back down again, which means that you basically have to win the fight and then circle back and revive them, which seems to be what they were going for, this mentality of essentially clearing the field so that you can go and save your people. Okay, that's all well and good and a cool idea in context, or in concept, but it was pretty unsatisfying to play that way, right? Which is why, for example, in when there was a really amazing overhaul mod for that PSP version, what they did was that you had to sacrifice another unit to bring somebody back at really good condition, which kind of kept that feeling of bringing people back, but gave you that immediacy of getting people back on their feet. But how did Reborn handle it in this case? What they did was they changed the context of everything entirely, where there were a lot of resurrection methods that you previously would never really use. Like, for example, you normally would just use the normal stones or something like that rather than the spells. The spell system got reworked entirely so that the old kind of adrenaline meter, the TP bar, and the MP bar were put together at the same time so that you could, for example, attack something, get more MP to revive something, and or activate one of your skills, and you could essentially have a more action feel to your strategy there. Or, for example, in this case, where we've got multiple different redos of mechanics, where he's got the ability to use this automatic system to essentially have two different ways to activate his resurrection ability at the same time. He's picked up an MP card that lets him regenerate more. This would have been the old clarity ability, whereas if he picked up a skill card, this might automatically just give him free casts. Being the class that he is, he's able to use almost every skill in the game. And in this case, we activated that to have one of the most expensive resurrections in the game. Which means that a niche little thing from before, where, for example, reviving somebody with a certain amount of MP suddenly matters. Because back in PSP, the context was that you brought somebody back with HP and MP, but not TP. Which meant that they couldn't activate any of their skills. However, in this case, because both of them are merged, this means that now they can activate skills, and potentially, due to the fact that it uses a percentage, this means that you can, for example, achieve certain thresholds in that MP bar to go bring somebody back in a different way. Like, she is specifically set up to where whenever she's revived, she will specifically always have at least 100 in order to go use another resurrection again, to then effectively chain these over and over on different units. So, for example, if I have my knight around here somewhere, did I even bring my knight? Oh yeah, he's over there. So effectively means that one revive can become several revives, and due to the fact that they immediately get a turn, this means that you can chain revive your entire party back up to health, and it's a really, really satisfying feeling. To have these moments where, yeah, that boss just went and absolutely thunderdunked your entire team, but what the hell are they gonna do about this? So that's what I mean. Like, there's this deep understanding of stuff that didn't work in very oddly specific ways with the original, but man, oh man, are they gonna pull off something really satisfying here. And right here, like this guy, this class right here is another example, where back in the original, he was essentially a multi-role fighter. That he was a guy that was given a lot of different abilities and could effectively do most of them poorly, where your options were, okay, you give this guy a crossbow, he just runs around one-shotting stuff after he ranks up his crossbows. Okay, cool. So that's going to be your main option then. So what's the point of using their buff abilities? What's the point of using their spells and things like that? There was little reason to use it. And so a lot of the stuff that got redone here was, for example, with the with units being assigned an element, which in FFT's case, think the Zodiac system, which I would expect that we'll see something a bit more color-coded there. More on that in just a moment, but in this case, they added something very similar where units will have a pretty massive advantage against each other. And in this case, what this created was a case where now, instead of, for example, needing to rank up augment water, which took a really long time to do, he is just out of the box good at using water because he's a water guy, but specifically water spells. His weapons are their own thing and could be good entirely in their own sense. Like, he could be a wind guy and still use this water crossbow, and because it's water, it still would be doing more versus a fire guy. But anyways, what this created was a bigger importance to those elements, which we actually see in a lot of FFT mods with, like, for example, in Cerebo's mod, where weapons were assigned particular elements, and that feels incredible. Like, we saw more elemental variants of things available far earlier on, and it made a lot of those kind of innate passive weaknesses that a lot of units have feel very exploitable, which felt really, really good. So I expect that we'll see that particular thing actually play a bigger part. Potentially seeing more elements, more racial abilities, that kind of thing. But going back to this Vartan unit here, so as I mentioned back in the PSP version, you basically had one overpowered weapon that they more or less could start the game with and just grind out to get one-shot kill level damage at long range, and there was little reason to go explore the other fun aspects of the unit. So they had very interesting gear axes, which few folks would ever use because, like, who cared about them potentially getting the Dragon Slayer set when you were limited to the number of slots that you could equip? So one of the changes that they made was that they gave you one extra armor slot, and what this created, or actually technically two extra armor slots depending on how you want to look at it. Now, what this created was much wider access to certain, for example, set effects that you could do. So in this case, this guy, so his spells were already were now suddenly actually useful. Those spells are less resisted by enemy units, which means that he can actually be a functional unit using this. We saw a lot of love given to use abilities in that same vein, where, for example, we see that this thing has 3 built-in casts of Acid Rain, and in this particular context, this means that while this unit isn't particularly much of a casting powerhouse by himself, if he, for example, picks up the right cards, he could be very threatening. So now, suddenly, his movement is also gone, and his movement has also become important here, where by himself, he's not necessarily going to be particularly strong, but courtesy of his high movement, he can now be a pretty big threat, courtesy of his ability to go collect cards easier, while also having access to this oddball selection of equipment and spells and whatever else, right? On top of this, for example, there were a lot of things that previously were not much use. Like, for example, this Air Touched ability, which gives him a little secondary damage tick on top of his attacks. But, again, going back into everything cycling back into itself, courtesy of this this effect here, he can equip this set here. We also see more love given to, again, oddball effects off of weapons, like this anti-dragon bonus off of this crossbow. And in this particular case, he uses that set effect to get this Dragon Slayer skill. This Dragon Slayer skill then translates into doing way more versus dragons. He goes and activates this skill, and now he does, essentially thousands instead of, dozens amount of damage to a dragon there. But because this particular additional damage tick is based off of how much you're doing with your initial shot, this now potentially near worthless little buff here becomes a potentially just insane amount of extra damage. And again, all of this is taking these little niche aspects of this class that were little like, oh, I guess they can do that, but why the hell would I bother kind of bullshit before? And now suddenly it turns into, oh, okay, we can actually make a lot of use of a lot of different stuff here. There's a reason to go make use of all of these little oddball abilities that this guy has. And I would expect that FFT would, again, lean into that quite a bit. Like those proc chances on weapons, I would expect that maybe there would be a chance to affect those proc chances. Maybe there would be a reason to, for example, have particular elements assigned to particular Zodiac things. A Pisces should definitely be a water. But either way, I would expect to see something similar. I would expect also maybe some more color coding, because one of those other little subtle changes that this one made was you see those bars are colored, and so when a unit has an advantage over somebody else, we see that denoted by, by virtue of this colored bar above their head that certain colors beat other colors. And again, I would expect that we'll see more of that from FFT because let's be honest, no one used those Zodiac counters outside. Wow, Merton's going nuts with the parries. No one used that Zodiac system outside of the folks doing challenge runs. Just be honest, you know it's true. It's such a cool idea that did not get explored, and I would expect that the Zodiac system would become vastly more important than it was before. Because again, it mostly was there for those little niche edge cases, just like Elements used to be for Tactics Ogre. And now this time around, now that we've got all these new elements in play, suddenly those matter a lot more. Those elements became a gigantic part of how combat works. Became this thing where just having access to these different abilities, different elements and stuff like that meant that units could have a vastly larger advantage than they ever could by grinding. That you'll see many new players, for example, frustrated getting into this game here, trying to play it like FFT. Well, essentially like FFT or the original Tactics Ogre or just any or hell, Triangle or something like that. Just this standard thing of number go up, and they find themselves getting more and more frustrated because they're like, I'm trying to grind and grinding isn't solving the thing. Why do I have to think? Which, again, you'd think would be a bit less common for a strategy genre, but it comes up all the dang time. But what I'm trying to get across here is that I would expect that we'll see a lot more strategic elements coming into play. This almost speed chess feel that they gave to Tactics Ogre is very, very unique. Even compared with its primary overhaul mod there, it's a very, very unique feeling to see such a massive bit of importance placed on stuff that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see that much in other contexts. Like you can see here, he's basically doing triple the damage to this guy as he would to the other one, courtesy of that elemental bonus. He's not even boosting that element himself, it's just the element on that particular move that ends up boosting it, which, again, for other RPGs, obviously would be a bit more of a thing, potentially. And obviously every game will have its own stuff that works or doesn't work, but in this particular instance, it ends up working really, really well in terms of emphasizing those advantages and disadvantages. So I would expect that we'll see the Zodiac system probably make a bigger play that's probably a bit more similar to something like the element system here, because it's just so satisfying to play with. It just feels really, really good to just not have any grind, to just go into any fight, minimum level, whatever else, and just be able to, for example, use these abilities, use things like guaranteed debuffs, which we haven't covered yet, where we saw debuffs get guarantees attached to them if using the particular skill that boosts them. So Spell Strike is a buff that you can get off of your items that allows you to boost to essentially boost that skill there. Or to boost debuffs to have a higher hit chance, but on top of that, it also guarantees their ability to actually hit those debuffs with at least 30% odds. And so I'm expecting that we'll probably see something similar, probably directly in that case, because some of the debuff odds could get pretty low. But additionally, I should point out that don't assume mechanically impossible things are going to remain impossible. Like in the case of Tor here, one of those elements that we saw play quite a big part was the fact that certain abilities got the ability to crit. So, for example, spells and monster abilities, for the most part, couldn't crit before, and now they can, and it's a massive deal. And this is going back to, again, that previous thing of just generally being more intuitive to new players while still allowing returning players to basically pick up where they left off with that end game feeling, where it still feels like you're doing big punishing numbers and it feels like your knowledge from before is paying off. But again, it all matters in different ways. And I would expect certain debuffs to also get reworked. Like buffs and debuffs in general across the board got reworked for this version. So for example, things like poison, instead of being a fixed number, became a percentage and stuff like that. So I'm sure we'll see lots of reworks as far as that goes. But yeah, I would expect the Zodiacs to function a lot like the elements do in Tor. It's just it feels really really good, and we've already seen that the elemental weapons exploiting weaknesses and things like that felt really really solid in stuff like the Cerebro mod, and well other mods as well. But that's the one that I would say I probably liked it the most in. Um, so so again, it just gave it this very fun, kind of poppy speed chess feeling, and I love it. It feels absolutely amazing. Also, I love that her evil armor at this point is upping her damage to 666. Anyway, so yeah. That being said, one actually little bit of context I should probably throw on there as well. Um, that this basically meant when I was talking about no grind, this literally meant that you could just completely ignore things like growths or specific achieving specific kind of thresholds for stats and things like that. All of that is oftentimes you'll see these complaints come up with remakes or remasters or whatever else over like, oh, my old ultra niche knowledge didn't necessarily translate to the remake. I can't use this one particular trick. See Resident Evil 2 players not being able to achieve an infinite machine gun and stuff like that. And it's like yeah, those things were more or less abusing original mechanics, and that's all well and good, but that's not the kind of everyday player experience. That's not necessarily going to be what was intended from the get-go. There's really no reason that it directly has to be translated as it was, if that makes sense. um, so again, oftentimes you'll see that decried as a lack of depth or something. But in this particular context, if there was less grinding, less needing to cheese, particular spawns to achieve particular effects or something, that would just be kind of better design in general. I personally like the idea of something along the lines of maybe an upkeep system where you specifically would need to maybe kind of upkeep your units to keep them functioning well as a particular class or something. I don't see them going that route, but I feel like it could potentially be interesting. But still, I could see something like that functioning a lot better than simply translating the old system of grinding, because there's no way that that would carry over well. I mean, for context, before I even played an ogre game, FFT was what I started with. It effectively was the one that got me started down this whole journey of various games of this type, and like even in that context, it's one that I find very difficult to go back to. It's one that's it's like you basically already know the tricks, and that was something that TOPSP suffered from as well. That after a while, you know the tricks, you know what breaks it, and so those breaks, they, it's fun to reference them, and it's better to change them into something else when you're going and revisiting things because it keeps stuff fresh. Simply grinding to avoid strategizing defeats the entire purpose of having it be a strategy game in the first place. Um, so I would expect that we'll definitely see a lot change as far as those classes go, in terms of not only how you potentially unlock them, but potentially kind of what they do in general. Like I would expect to see a lot more kind of overall interaction from something like a Geomancer. Maybe we'll see more Geomancy stuff worked into other weapons or skills or something. Maybe we'll see weapon guards attached to shields, kind of like how we saw with Parry here. Maybe we'll see more cases of, let's say, maybe chemists having more traversal items, like we saw in something like Triangle Strategy, where they had essentially one character that could do a cool thing with items, and then just decided, yeah, you know what, that's good enough, and then just never bothered actually exploring that. Um, so I'm sure we'll see a lot of different ideas potentially explored, because again, there's a lot of little context that can potentially come out from these different cases, like we saw right there with that ability she just used. You probably didn't notice anything different if you're not familiar with the different versions of this game. But they actually changed the firing pattern on summons in this one to where people use them a lot more this time around because they were a more predictable firing pattern. That instead of being a full scatter shot, they go wherever the hell they feel like, they updated it to where instead they'll fire essentially taking turns on each unit at a time. Which basically translated to a lot more people using summons, which previously were practically unused outside of people that knew how to abuse the element system. Or, for example, little quality of life features like we see right here. You saw that we knew what items that unit picked up because once we end up circling back and killing off that unit, they'll end up dropping the that item that they just stole. So again, just a lot of different quality of life features can mean a lot of different things. So, like stealing back equipment, I would certainly think that that's definitely going to be a thing. Maybe using the thief, maybe utilizing the thief to steal equipment back and forth, maybe killing off the unit to get them to drop their stuff. Maybe using something like the thief to tie up a unit rather than just stealing things. There's a lot of ways for that to play out, but as far as I see it, it's something they can definitely do a lot more with. I would expect that we'll maybe see broken equipment probably being less outright destroyed by, for example, things like knights and whatnot, and probably just disabled and in need of repair. That would definitely be something that you would expect to happen, no questions asked. Because equipment breaking was such a cool idea in FFT, but man, just honest show of hands here. Who actually didn't reset their save as soon as their freaking weapon got destroyed? I mean, look, I'm a stubborn bastard, and I typically would end up just sticking with it, but every time that I've ever heard somebody bring it up, it was like, oh, it was annoying. It forced me to reload my save, like not even leaving the option open to not do that. Like it just always seemed to be a thing that folks would just immediately reset anytime it happened. So I would expect that we'll probably see more of a damaged state given to broken equipment rather than what we saw before. I would expect that we'll probably see a lot less overall grinding and things. Like we'll probably see more of an XP system. I would think closer to something like what Tactics Ogre did, where maybe stuff's doled out after the fight rather than during it, just to avoid those same shenanigans. Though then again, maybe rather than grinding for points, again, just something more scaled, something to upkeep skills, maybe something more to I'm trying to think how that would potentially kind of flow better, because like stuff like feats and unlocks and things like that does still create that same problem where you unlock the thing and it's a one and done. But if you're forced to upkeep it all the time, maybe you sort of build up your skills equipment style, or kind of like the cards, but not really. Like from here, like for example, let's say you have those skills equipped, but they don't get their maximum effectiveness until you've gone and used them a few times or something. Like maybe you kind of gotta get warmed up, like it's Battle Brothers or something. So that could potentially be a thing too. I'm really fascinated to see what they end up doing with that, because that sounds like it's got a lot of potential. So maybe we'll see something like that. I would expect that they'll probably end up redoing an absolute hell of a lot of spawns and things. Like you'll notice right here, there's specific fights like this one here where they actually were kind of almost kind of giving a little bit of a wink and nod to the player here. Where you'll notice that there's a random necromancer that's just hanging out on this particular map, because one of the things that you could potentially use to cheese this fight would be zombies, and so he's basically here to say that he's just going to go delete your zombies for you. Anyway, so yeah, I would expect that we'll see something along those lines. Additionally, as far as timing goes, like we talked earlier about the revive system, I would think that there probably would be more delay moves worked in. It always did seem weird that there weren't more delays in that system. A lot of mods actually seem to like that idea as well. So we'll probably see more delays, but obviously we don't know anything yet. But as far as new systems go, would they implement a kind of automatic system like they see here? I doubt it. Automatics in this case were mostly there because people would end up spending a lot of time going through menus. So I would expect that we probably would not see an automatic system worked in. Again, automatics and cards strictly, I think, would be a tour thing. And again, just to reiterate this again, these were not made to simplify the game. They were made because people were spending way too much friggin' time in menus. So, you would go and activate one skill, you would activate another skill, you would kind of go and piecemeal out your turn. And this works in the case of, for example, the One Vision mod, which gave a lot of interesting options to every one of those little choices, but it is also too slow for most folks that would be playing it these days. So Effectively, what they did was that they made these automatics so that a new player could be functionally tricked into using skills right. And for a already experienced player, they know how good those skills can be, and instead they would end up, for example, picking up auto cards to be able to go and guarantee that they'll trigger and essentially position the unit in the right way to make them trigger, giving you, again, that feeling of build up over the course of the fight, giving you that feeling of building up your build, so to speak, kind of rebuilding your build, while also still allowing for those skills to technically be buffed in the meantime. So you no longer had to grind, and again, just generally had more direct action going on at any given time, which felt really, really good. Except for these guys right now, which just got actioned out of existence. That's fine; they'll be revived in a moment. Anyway, so yeah, that's more or less what I wanted to get across here. That I would expect that we'll probably see a very kind of endgame FFT-esque feel from the very beginning. We'll probably see a vast kind of swath of new skills available right from the get-go. If I were to guess, I would expect that we'll see equipment not getting broken anymore, but potentially just need to be repaired, which would mean that the braking system in general could see a lot more stuff. Maybe we would even see more Vagrant Story mechanics come back, like we saw in Tactics Ogre multiple times, where maybe we'll see something like Prestasia get to make a comeback, where it repairs your equipment on the fly or something. So, could be a thing. So potentially an idea there. Maybe we'll, hell, I'm sure we'll see plenty of Vagrant Story callbacks, because, like, why wouldn't we? You can tell that they absolutely loved Vagrant Story, but for some reason it has not been touched at any point. And if they quietly decided to make a Vagrant Story a remake while making the FFT remake, that would be quite the play. It's like, yeah, we decided to do both at the same time. What you gonna do about it? So that'd be kind of cool to see. I would expect to see, obviously, a lot of new different functions added to things. I would expect to see that Zodiac system being used more like the element system here, and would expect it to play a far bigger part. I would expect that there would be a lot more UI elements for said Zodiac system, seeing as before it was just a little symbol, and nobody learned those symbols outside of, again, people doing challenge runs. Just be honest. So I would expect that we'll see more of that coming into play as well. Just in general, the UI needed a good bit of help there. As far as its physical form, I would expect that it definitely would not be on the old War of the Lions engine at this point. That thing, that poor old thing, just needs to be taken out. Well, it needed to be taken out to pasture a decade ago, maybe even two, but they just kept wheeling it out for one more show. So I'm sure we'll see more of that happening, where we'll probably see it in a new engine. I mean, really, a new engine's mostly what that version needed. Unlike another bit of context that I feel got missed a lot during that previous video. Part of the reason that Tor took the form that it did was because there was simply too much story scripting to even make it feasible for somebody to remake it from the ground up. It was just way too much stuff that could potentially go wrong, so it had to be remade in this engine. As far as remaking FFT with this engine, I highly doubt that would happen, but the hell, that would be amazing if they did, because it's got a lot of functions that they didn't even use in Tor. So, yeah, that would be really cool to see. Again, I don't see it happening, but it would be really cool to see. So that could be something. But they definitely, I really, 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 really doubt that they'll continue using the old engine that they've been reusing over and over, like it, just beating the crap out of the dust that was previously a dead horse with the other versions. Because again, it's been slowly rotting away over time, more or less. I mean, we had the original PS1 version, all right? It had really solid elements all throughout. When they remade it in PSP, problem was that they when they redid it, they lost a lot of the audio kind of stuff to it. They lost a lot of audio layers. They lost well, they had a bunch of issues with frame rate and such. And the weird part that came out of this was over time they never patched those out. Like, we saw patches show up created by modders within like a day of that thing releasing, but every time that it came out, it ran into the same issue again and again and again and again and again, where the frame rate was just tanking during certain abilities. and that felt awful. Like you would just see abilities literally in the first fight of the game that would just slow the game to an absolute chug. It literally could not handle those animations, despite them being the same as the PS1 version, which could play just fine on the PSP without any chug whatsoever. It wasn't the PSP hardware, which some folks try to blame it on. Like, oh, it's such a weak device. Like, no, that thing could handle the original one just fine. You can literally just go buy the original version, and it's just kind of better, better out of the box experience in my eyes, anyway. But one of the things that came out of it was that frame rate issue never went away. They ported it to Android and iOS. It never went away. They ported it to iOS again, apparently. I guess it was just some different version or something. And again, just the same issues kept popping up, where it just would not stop having frame rate issues. So they started working around it rather than just directly addressing the issue. So for example, what they did was that they just started speeding up scenes. They gave it a sort of checkpoint system. That was awesome. But again, speeding up a scene is not the same thing as just fixing the frame rate of the issue from to begin with. So you have issues where it'll like lag on menus, and it'll kind of jank out in the middle of fights, but it'll fast forward through the jank, and it's a very uniquely dorky looking thing. So it just sort of had this feeling of rotting away while they stuck more makeup on it, where, like, you know, it got a full 3D camera, and it got new sprites, and those sprites looked super just doughy if you looked at them from the wrong angle, which you now could because of the new free moving camera. The checkpoint system was amazing, but it also had a tendency to kind of save at weird times. So, for example, I had one situation where it just kind of saved me into a soft block, and I couldn't reload past to the previous section here. Yeah, it was interesting. Anyway, so yeah, it was a very, very, very strange, strange situation with that game. Also, I don't know, out of curiosity, do these guys have any revive items left? I've been chattering so hard that I completely flubbed this fight here. But yeah, very, very odd duck, that game. So I'm hoping that they will finally let the old horse stop getting beaten and finally give it a new engine and such. I'm pretty sure they will, but, you know, you never quite know, do you? Anyway, so that's about all I had time for here today. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this one as is. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this whole thing, over what we might potentially see, what Tor might be telling us about what they'll be planning to do for that one. And yeah, I would definitely not expect what a lot of the comments were saying over just simple little touch-ups here and there. It needed way more than a few little simple touch-ups. As much as I love and respect the game, it needed some work. It definitely needs some modernizations to really kind of stand up these days and such. It really does need quite a few touch-ups, and I would expect that we'll probably see some pretty elegant work if Tor is anything to go by. Because, again, they seem to have a good understanding over what made the original work before they even start on one of these remake projects. I forget if I mentioned Legend of Mana up to this point, but it probably was a pretty solid example, where a lot of the updates that they made to that one are basically unrecognizable to somebody that has never played the original. But for folks like, for example, my friend that has played the original to a pretty insane degree, you know, she was basically saying that there were a lot of updated elements that, again, nobody would notice, just like little continuity things that most folks would probably never pick up on. Just, you know, little odds and ends here and there that have no real reason to be much of a big deal for anyone other than fans that were around for the long term, you know? So I'm sure we'll see a lot more of that coming into play. But anyways, that's all I had time for here today, so y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care, and I gotta head out. Thank y'all for stopping by. Later.